Hello, and welcome to the Murder House Radio Show. I'm your host, X. On this show, we will be covering serial killers, mass shooters, disappearances, true crime, and the most deplorable things and people in history, and all that good, dark stuff. The Murder House Radio Show will be a radio show / podcast. I'll be uploading videos every Friday at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. Once you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification and select all to get all notifications if you are viewing on YouTube. And hit the follow button if you are listening on any podcasting platform. So sit down, get comfortable, grab some coffee or whatever your preferred beverage is. Turn off the lights and enjoy the show. How you guys doing? How was your fucking March? Yeah, that was last month. Your March. Convenient. It's April 2nd today when you're hearing this. Fucking the 2nd is a Friday, yeah. So that's pretty good. How was your weekend? Well, how was your Friday anyway, not your weekend? How's it going? Leave it in the comments. I haven't interacted with you guys yet so far this early in the podcast. But yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Just trying to stave off this ever-impending feeling of impending doom. Holy, just real sad boy things. But you know, it'd be like that sometimes. But yeah, don't mind the noises in the background, because as you may have heard in a previous podcast, my room's in the basement where the washer and dryer is, so that's just the dryer. But yeah, also, all the sources will be in the description, so check those out if you want further knowledge, because I won't be reading directly off the websites the whole time, so I don't get copyrighted or whatever you want to call it. But let's dive into today's episode. Today's episode will be on Gary Ridgeway, aka the Green River Killer, aka that Ned Flanders Oakley Dokley looking ass fuck. I'm sorry I had to say it fit the picture. He kind of does look like a Ned Flanders in real life. Gary Ridgeway was the second most notorious killer, well, serial killer in American history that we know of so far. He was born February 18th, 1949. Interesting. But he was originally convicted of 48 murders, but then another one was added, making it 49. And yeah, Ted Bundy helped actually catch him, I'm pretty sure, because he's getting jealous that his body count was higher. I'll go look that for you guys real quick. So investigators were stumped by a bunch of killings happening around the South King County area from young women disappearing around the Green River or whatever. That's where their bodies were found. And as we all know, Bundy was into killing young college girls, so he was obviously the one they would go to for help. Ted Bundy actually went to them for assistance, like he offered his help. So that's actually pretty interesting. He went to them and offered his insight into the mentality of the serial killer. And what other way, well, what better way to get inside the head of a serial killer from another serial killer. But eventually, with the help of Bundy, Gary Ridgeway was caught. But yeah, Bundy went to a detective Dave Reacher, and he said, "Don't ask me why I believe I'm an expert in this area. Just accept that I am, and we'll start from there." And that's what he wrote to him in a letter from a Florida jail. That's interesting. But yeah, he probably technically would be an expert, because, you know, he's a serial killer. Reports vary, but some reports say that Bundy said or thought that the Green River Killer would maybe be possibly going back to the sites that he left the bodies to perform sexual acts and suggested that detectives stake out the fresh burial sites, which I'm pretty sure they did. I'm not sure. Like, they may have took the body and staked the site out, or even left the body or whatever. But we'll get into that later when we do some more reading. But yeah, Bundy helped the detective figure out that serial killers have a lot in common and stuff, which is very true. But yeah, they said that lots in common, whether they kill prostitutes as Mr. Ridgeway and Jack the Ripper did, young boys as John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer did, or whatever, or young women as Mr. Bundy did. So yeah, just commonalities or whatever. But yeah, Gary Ridgway's full name was Gary Leon Ridgway. So yeah, he killed teenage women like Bundy, as I said. I'm pretty sure I said that earlier. He was on his killing spree in the state of Washington during the 1980s and 1990s. And most of his victims were sex workers and other women in vulnerable circumstances and underage runaways. The press was the one to give him his nickname after the first 5 victims were found at the Green River before his identity was known, obviously. But yeah, he was known to strangle his victims, usually by hand, and but sometimes he would use their lingerie or some rope or whatever. And then after strangling them, he would dump their bodies in the forest and overgrown areas in King County, and he'd often return to the bodies and have sexual intercourse with them, which is pretty fucked up. But yeah, I think he'd also do it while they were alive too, then kill them. I'm not too sure, not 100% sure. November 30th, 2001. Oh, that's like 6 days after I was born. Holy. He was, after Ridgeway was leaving the Kenworth truck factory where he worked in Renton, Washington, he was arrested for the murders of 4 women whose cases were linked to him through DNA profiling evidence. Oof. As part of a plea bargain wherein he agreed to disclose the locations of the still missing women, he was spared the death penalty and received a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. But yeah, that's the breakdown of Gary Ridgway. Also, how would you go about committing a murder or a crime without leaving DNA evidence? What would your perfect crime be? How would you do it? Drop it in the comments. Alright, so let's get into his early life. Gary Leon Ridgway was born February 18th, 1949, like I said, but he was born in Salt Lake City, Utah. Utah, nice. He was the second child of 3, so that's all good, the middle child. Home life was somewhat troubled. Relatives have described his mother as domineering, so like controlling, I would say, like strict, and they have said that while he was young, he witnessed more than one violent altercation between his parents. Oof, that's never good. His father was a bus driver who would often complain about the presence of sex workers. That's why he might have targeted sex workers. Makes sense. Ridgeway had a bad bedwetting problem. Oh, he's a pee boy. It's okay. It'd be like that for guys especially. I think for guys, they stop wetting the bed maybe like around like, I want to say, 5 to 13-ish, around there. And even later if they have medical problems and shit. But he stopped wetting the bed when he was 13. And his mother would wash him for him. So, like, rub him down and wash his genitals after every episode. So, borderline molestation. Because you can do that shit when you're, like, fucking old enough. Like, 10, 13, around there. Even earlier. That's messed up. He would later tell defense psychologists that as an adolescent, he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction towards his mother. and fantasized about killing her. Oh, shite. Ridgeway is dyslexic, so learning disability, and he was held back a year in high school. And then he was 16. When he was 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy who survived. And Ridgeway had led the boy into the woods and stabbed him through the ribs into his liver. Oof. Ridgeway's IQ was recorded as being in the low 80s. Well, goddamn. I'm not sure how low it has to be for you to be considered mentally disabled, even though I'm not sure how severe of a mental illness dyslexia is. Maybe one of y'all knows it and can leave it down in the comments for the rest of us peasants. Now into his adult life. He did graduate high school. He went to T High School, Tyee, and this was in 1969. And he married his 19-year-old girlfriend. Okay. And he joined the United States Navy. Nice. A military man. He was a Vietnam veteran. Well, he was sent to Vietnam, so I guess you could call him a Vietnam veteran, where he served as a boat supply ship and saw combat. Nice. During his time in the military, Ridgeway had frequent sexual encounters with sex workers and contracted gonorrhea. He was pissed off by this, but what do you expect? But he still continued these activities without wearing protection. But you gotta be a straight savage to be banging hookers without fucking condoms. Like, holy. But their marriage ended within a year because he would get hookers and probably got gonorrhea. Well, probably because of the hookers and the gonorrhea. It's kind of wild that he would get hookers, especially because his dad would complain about him and didn't like him, and he didn't like him much either, but he would still get them, so he had a love-hate relationship with hookers. But it's still wild shit. What are your guys' stances on hookers and prostitution and stuff? Leave it down in the comments below or whatever, because, it's interesting topic or whatever. I don't really understand why it's illegal. I don't know. Leave it in the comments. Also, while we're on the topic of hookers, I have one of my favorite gifs is Tig from Sons of Anarchy, and it's him saying, "And this is why I beat hookers." It's a funny gif. It fits in for a lot of stuff. When people would talk to his friends and family, they would describe him as friendly but strange. Yeah, because he looks like Ned Flanders. But his first 2 marriages resulted in divorce because of his infidelities by both partners. Ooh. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, claimed that he had placed her in a chokehold. Ooh, so he's abusive. He had become religious during his second marriage, and he would push that onto his partners or whatever, and he would read the Bible out loud at work and at home. Interesting. And insisting that his wife follow him in his footsteps of their strict religion. And damn, interesting. Ridgeway would also frequently cry after sermons or readings of the Bible. That's whack. No offense to any of you religious people or whatever, but Despite his beliefs, Ridgeway continued to solicit the service of hookers and wanted his wife to participate in public sex and in inappropriate places. Ooh, we got a fucking risk taker. Sometimes even in areas where his victims' bodies were laid. Ooh, damn, boy. That took a little bit of a turn right there. A little bit of a turner since. According to the various women in his life, he had a very high sex drive. All good. It'd be like that sometimes. But his wives and ex-girlfriends and all that stuff would say he demanded sex from them several times a day. Bro, I could only go like twice a day, bro. Like if it came down to it, only twice a day. But yeah, he'd often want to have sex in public areas or in the woods, and Ridgeway himself admitted to having a fixation with sex workers. Yep. But he would have, I said the love-hate relationship with them. He frequently complained about their presence in his neighborhood, but he also took advantage of their services regularly, which is also weird because his father didn't like them either or whatever. I don't know if his father partook in them, but he didn't like them. Some have speculated that Ridgeway was torn between his lust and his religious beliefs, but yeah, makes sense. With his second wife, Marissa, Ridgeway had a son, so he has a kid. One kid so far that we know of that was born in 1975. Imagine having a serial killer father, man. That'd be weird. And by the time he's arrested, man, the kid was like 25-ish, because he's arrested in the 90s. So what, 75, 85, 95-ish. So yeah, about 25. He grew up with a serial killer dad. Imagine pissing off your dad or whatever, and he gives you that look like, fucking kill you, and then he just fucking shakes his head, go to your room, boy. Fuck. But, yeah, that'd be pretty wild. So, let's get into his murders. So, throughout the 80s and 90s, Ridgeway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women near the Seattle and Tacoma, Washington area. And in statements taken in the court, Ridgeway later reported that he had killed so many that he had lost count. Yeah, I'd think after that. But the majority of the murders occurred between 1982 and 1984. So yeah, what I said about the son was probably true, man, if they lived together. But the victims were believed to be sex workers or runaways, like I said, who he would pick up along the Pacific Highway South. And Ridgeway would sometimes show the women a picture of his son to trick them into trusting him. Because, yeah, lots of women love those kids or whatever. Not in a creepy way, of course. Well, some love them in that creepy way, but you never know. They would engage in sexual activities, and after minutes of intercourse from behind, Ridgeway would wrap his forearm around the front of their neck, so he'd be hitting that doggy style there, bruv. And he would just chokehold them and choke them to death in that rear naked chokehold kind of deal-ish. And use the other arm to pull back as tightly as he could, strangling them. Yo, if you ever got in like a little friendly bro scrap wrestling match kind of deal, and you got him in a headlock and tried to make him tap, that shit's hard, bro, and takes forever. Like, I've never made someone pass out from that, but like, it's hard. He killed most victims in his home, his truck, or in secluded areas. Oof. Most of their bodies were dumped in the wooded areas around the Green River, Seattle, Tacoma International Airport, and other dump sites within South King County. Yeah, and so there's that. Pretty interesting. Yeah. But if you're trained to put people in headlocks and put them to sleep, it wouldn't be that hard. But if you have no training, it would take forever and be hard. So, I don't have any training or whatever, so, yeah. The bodies were often left in, clutters or whatever, so more than one victim in the same place, and they were, sometimes posed and usually naked. And, he would sometimes return to the bodies and have sexual intercourse, like I said earlier. But, yeah. Ridgeway later explained that he did not find necrophilia more sexually satisfying, but having sex with the deceased reduced his need to obtain a living victim and thus limit his exposure to being caught. Makes sense, but goddamn, bro. But, yeah, most of the bodies were not discovered until only the skeletons remained. 2 victims were still unidentified, and, Gary occasionally contaminated the dump sites with a bunch of other stuff like gum, cigarettes, written materials, all belonging to other people. And he would even transport the victims' remains across state lines into Oregon to throw off the police. So he is definitely a smart, organized killer. Interesting. Very interesting stuff. The Green River Task Force was founded by the King County Sheriff's Office in the early 1980s, and this was to investigate the murders, obviously. The task force members included Robert Keppel, oh, that's the Ted Bundy dude, I'm pretty sure, and David Richard, Reichert, who periodically interviewed incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy, which we got into earlier. But Ridgeway was arrested in 1982 and 2001 on charges related to prostitution, so no strangers with brush-ins of the law. He became a suspect in the Green River killings in 1983, and in 1984, Gary passed a polygraph test. Ooh, so he had some skills. On April 7th, 1987, police took hair and saliva samples from Ridgeway. I'm pretty sure that was willingly as well. So in 1985, Ridgeway began dating Judith Mawson, who became his third wife in 1988. And Mawson claimed in 2010 on a television interview that she moved into his house while they were dating. There was no carpet. Ooh. Detectives later told her he had probably wrapped a body in the carpet. Ooh, goddamn. In the same interview, she described how he would leave for work early in the morning some days, ostensibly for the overtime pay, okay? Mawson speculated that he must have committed some of the murders while supposedly working these early morning shifts. Makes sense. She claimed that she had not suspected Ridgeway's crimes before she was contacted by the authorities in 1987, and had not even heard of the Green River Killer before that time because she did not watch the news. Okay, that right there. It's either she had no clue or she had a slight inkling, because who doesn't watch the news? Because of course this was before the internet, obviously, but people tend to watch the news. Sometimes my mom watches the news and I just catch glimpses of it or whatever, and hear glimpses of it, hear something interesting, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll sit there and listen for like a few minutes and then I'll dip or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. So I would say it's 50-50 on her knowing or not knowing or whatever. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Ridgeway later said in an interview while in prison that when he was in his relationship with Mawson, his killing rate went down because he loved her or whatever, so he's occupied with her. So of his 49 known victims, only 3 were killed after he married Mawson. Holy, that's wild. That is wild right there. I did not see that coming. Mawson told a local television reporter, "I feel I have saved lives by being his wife and making him happy." Oh yeah, that's wild right there. So maybe women can change a man, maybe-ish, kinda. The samples collected in 1987 were later subjected to DNA profiling, providing the evidence for his arrest warrant. So he provided it, and then they later tested it, word. But on November 30th, 2001, Ridgeway was arrested at work, but yeah, all good. Ridgeway was arrested on suspicion of murdering 4 women nearly 20 years earlier, after first being identified as a potential suspect when DNA evidence conclusively linked semen left in his victims to the saliva swab taken by the police. Oh. The 4 victims named in the original indictment were Marcia Chapman, Opala Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. 3 more victims, Wendy Caulfield, Deborah Booner, Bonner, and Deborah Estes, were added to the indictment for a forensic scientist identified microscopic spray paint sapphires as a specific brand and composition of paint used at the truck factory during the specific time frame where these victims were killed. Okay, word. So they linked the paint to where he worked, therefore linking it to Ridgeway because he worked with it. All good. That's interesting. So a murder indictment of 4, 6, 7. So about a 7 murder count indictment, or however you say it. That's a pretty hefty, those are pretty hefty charges right there. As I said earlier in previous videos, that you need a lot of evidence for murder indictments or whatever, or to even lay murder charges. But yeah, it's wild. So on November 5th, 2003, Ridgeway entered a guilty plea to the 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder as a part of his plea bargain, and agreed to, in June, that they would spare him from execution in exchange for his cooperation locating the remains of his victims and providing other details. Interesting. In his statement accompanying his guilty plea, Ridgeway explained that he had killed all of his victims inside King County, Washington, and that he transported and dumped the remains of 2 women near Portland to confuse the police. Yes, like I said earlier, Deputy Prosecutor Jeffrey Barron noted in court that the deal contained the names of 41 victims who would not be subject to State v. Ridgeway if it were not for the plea agreement. King County Prosecutor Attorney Norman Malgnan explained his decision to make the deal. We could have gone forward with 7 counts, but that is all we could have ever hoped to solve. At the end of the trial, whatever the outcome, there would have been lingering doubts about the rest of these crimes. This agreement was the avenue of truth. And in the end, the search for the truth is still why we have a criminal justice system. Gary Ridgeway does not deserve our mercy. He does not deserve to live. The mercy provided by today's resolution is directed not at Ridgeway, but towards the families who have suffered so much. Makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. So on December 18th, 2003, Ridgeway was sentenced to 48 life sentences with no possibility of parole. So he'd have to die 48 times to be released, basically. So, yeah. And, yeah. 1 life sentence to be served consecutively. Okay, word. He also was sentenced to an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims. So, whatever 10 times 48 is, added on to the 48 life sentences. Adding 480 years to his 48 life sentences. Yeah, I'm dumb. But, yeah, there you go. That's what he was sentenced to. But, yeah, he led prosecutors to 3 bodies in 2003. On August 16th of that year, the remains of a 16-year-old girl found near Enumluka, Washington, 40 feet from the state route 410, were pronounced to belong to Pammy Antine Avent, who had been believed to be a victim of the Green River Killer. The remains of Maria Malavera and April Buttaram were found in September 2003. So in November 23rd, a day before my birthday, and a reporter reported, obviously, that a weekend hiker found the skull of one of the 48 women Ridgeway admitted to murdering in his 2003 plea agreement. And the skull of another victim, Tracy Winston, who was 19 when she disappeared from Northgate Mall. Oh, there's a mall like that where I live. Same name and everything. On September 12th, 1983, was found on November 20th, 2005, by a man hiking in the wooded area near Highway 18 near Issaquah, southeast of Seattle. Oh. So, the Bundy and the Green River Killer had pretty much the same stomping grounds, kinda. All in Seattle and around that area. Interesting stuff. So Ridgeway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer. Over a period of 5 months of police and prosecutor interviews, he confessed to 48 murders, 42 of which were on the police list for the Green River victims. On February 9th, 2004, county prosecutors began to release the videotape recordings of Ridgeway's confessions. In one taped interview, he initially told investigators that he was responsible for the deaths of 65 women. In another taped interview with Richard on December 31st, 2003, Ridgeway claimed to have murdered 71 victims and confessed to having had sex with them before killing them, a detail which he did not reveal until after his sentencing. But his confessions, he acknowledged that he targeted prostitutes because they were easy to pick up. Very true. Not that I would know. Just kidding, but they are easy to pick up though, because that's kind of their job, which is sad. And that he hated most of them. He confessed that he had sex with his victims' bodies after he murdered them, but claimed he began burying the later victims so that he could resist the urge to commit necrophilia. Okay. Ridgeway later said that murdering young women was his career. Holy. Hey, little Timmy, what do you want to be when you're older? I want to murder young women. I shouldn't joke about that, but holy. Okay, so his life in prison. So Gary Ridgeway was placed in solitary confinement, which is 23 and 1, 23 hours in your cell a day, 1 hour out to have recreation and shower. He was imprisoned in Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla in January 2004. On May 14th, 2015, he was transferred to UPS Florence High, which is in Florence, Colorado, I'm pretty sure. It's a federal penitentiary, high security federal prison east of Cañon City, Colorado, yeah. In September 2015, after a public outcry and discussions with Governor Jay Inslee, Corrections Secretary Bernie Warner announced that Ridgeway would be transferred back to Washington for easy accessibility for open murder investigations. Ridgeway was returned by charter planes, so Con Air, to Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla from the high security prison in Florence, Colorado. So, So this was on October 24th, 2015. So, there's his little prison stints or whatever. So, it's interesting. I wonder if it was ADX Florence or another Florence prison. Because, it'd be interesting. So, on this site or whatever, they have all the confirmed victims of Gary Ridgeway, all 49 of them. And some of them are Jane Does. The last two are Jane Does. in between the ages of 14 and 24. So that's wild. And some of them weren't even reported missing for like a long time. But yeah, that's sad. You can go on the site in the description below and look at these victims if you're curious. But yeah, I'm not reading all of those. I did that in one video on another channel or whatever. Not Gary Ridgeway anyway, but yeah, that bummed me out for like a week. I'm not about to do that again. But yeah, it says here that before his confessions, a lot of these murders weren't attributed to him, and the confessions and directions led police search crews to find the bodies of a bunch of other people, and yeah. And then bodies were stumbled on that he admitted to, and a bunch were found because of his instructions. But yeah, it's pretty sad and tragic. There's also a few John Does and stuff. John Does are Jane Does. John Does are guys. Jane Does are victims that are unidentified or whatever. There's a funny story behind those or whatever. Never mind. I was thinking about the CPR dummies or whatever. But yeah, there's a funny story behind those. The face was taken from a drowned woman and put on the doll. Like a mold of the woman's face was taken and put it on the CPR dolls. So yeah, let that one marinate real quick. Fun facts for y'all. So yeah, he was charged with the 48 murders or whatever, 48, 49 murders, and is the suspect in a bunch of other murders. But yeah, he was, there's a suspect of not the suspect, he's suspected of committing murders called the Task Force Victims List, and there are 6 victims. And yeah, you can also go to the website and check these out as well. But yeah, definitely interesting. Definitely very interesting. He was a killer of the social media era, so there is a bunch of stuff on him, pop culture stuff, artwork and stuff, and a bunch of fiction and non-fiction documentaries. There's about 11 here. And then in print, so like books, non-fiction, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 non-fiction books. Go on your search those up. Just search up Green River Killer books. There are 3 fiction prints, so true books like biographies and stuff. There is music. The grunge band Green River was named in reference to the murders. Interesting. But yeah, there's music. There are 4 music points for him. Some songs and some bands. Interesting. And then there are television fictions. There are 3. So go check those out if you want. Go check those out. Definitely interesting. So yeah. But yeah, it's scary how he was just your normal, typical, everyday dude, family man, husband. Dabbled in prostitutes, but that's not that crazy. But yeah, it's definitely scary. He was an organized killer, and his killings went on for like a long time, man, like 20 years. It's pretty gnarly. It's pretty gnarly right there. Also, his first victim may have been Wendy Caulfield, who was discovered July 15th, 1982. They were discovered by a group of children. That's pretty wild and sad for those kids. They probably remember that till this day or whatever. But yeah. There's also that movie where the group of boys or whatever go set out to go find this body that the one boy found or whatever. I forget the movie's name, but if you know what I'm talking about, leave it in the comments or whatever. But yeah, kind of like that movie. Maybe I wonder if they all fucking went their separate ways or whatever. Yeah. Let me know if you know what that movie's called. If you even know what I'm talking about, or do I just sound crazy? I hope you're having a good Friday and have a good rest of your evening. And I hope you're having a good start to your month. So that is Gary Ridgeway, aka the Green River Killer. Thank you for listening to this episode on the Murder House Radio Show. Check out the social medias and the sources in the description below. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. Once you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification and select all to get all notifications if you are viewing on YouTube. If you're viewing on a podcasting platform, hit follow. See you on the next episode. This is your host X signing off.